You're ready to go. Have a good session.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm John Skank, and this is the Lattice Cryptanalysis session of Crypto 2021. We have a nice program here. We're going to do five-minute talks and then move over to a Q&A. At any point, you can start dropping questions into the Zulip chat. Kay just dropped a link in the Zoom chat. So yeah, we'll move over to Q&A at about quarter past, maybe 20 past the hour. And let's get started. So first, we have Sam Hopkins presenting counterexamples to new circular security assumptions underlying I/O. Take it away, Sam.
Thanks so much. So this is joint work with Ayush Jain and Rachel Lin. Our work falls in a line of recent works which are studying the following basic question. Can indistinguishability obfuscation, which is a intensely studied, very useful cryptographic primitive from the last decade or so, can it be based on lattices alone? So only very recently, we have a construction of indistinguishability obfuscation, which is based on well-founded assumptions by Jain, Lin, and Sahai. But there are many potential advantages to give indistinguishability obfuscation based only on lattices. One is that such a construction would be plausibly post-quantum secure. The existing construction uses assumptions which are not post-quantum secure. And the other is that if we can reduce the number of assumptions needed, we can hope for simpler and more parsimonious constructions. So these are just two of many potential advantages. In particular, there are three recent works that give new and simple candidate I/O constructions in this direction, due to Brakerski, Lingard, Malavolta, Gay and Pass, and Wee and Wicks. And the latter two works in particular give clean and simple to state falsifiable assumptions under which they can prove security of their candidate I/O construction. So this is very exciting. These assumptions are not yet just learning with errors. That would really solve the problem. But they're what I'm going to call an LWE++ type of assumption. They assume learning with errors, and then they assume that some fully homomorphic encryption scheme whose security is based on learning with errors remains secure in the presence of a couple of additional types of information leakage, which I'm going to describe very shortly. So given these exciting constructions, it's now imperative to do cryptoanalysis on this kind of LWE++ assumption to understand the lay of the land. What kind of assumptions like this could be true, which are not, and how can we give plausible assumptions on which we can base security of I/O. So our results in a nutshell are that the particular forms of the LWE++ assumptions that are given in Gay and Pass and Wee and Wicks are unfortunately not true. So we give attacks on these assumptions. However, to be clear, the overall strategy of the I/O constructions of all three papers and the constructions themselves are not broken by our work and in fact remain promising. So it's our hope that our attacks can be used to give more refined assumptions under which we could still prove security of I/O and hopefully eventually give assumptions that are believable and thoroughly tested. So for the rest of the talk, I'm going to give you a little more detail on the particular LWE++ assumption used by Gay and Pass and our attack on it. So let's fix some kind of nice fully homomorphic encryption scheme whose security is based on learning with errors, for instance, Gentry-Sahai Waters. Now, I said that LWE++ assumptions assume security of like GSW, our FHE scheme, plus a couple of additional kinds of leakages. Let me describe those leakages to you. So the first is the leakage that happens in a circular security scheme. Just to refresh ourselves, circular security means that some key cycle, in this case, let's say a length 2 key cycle, is released to the attacker. That means that we set up two copies of our FHE scheme with a secret key and a public key and a secret key and a public key. And we publish the secret key of one scheme encrypted under the public key of the other and vice versa. So this kind of circular security, while security of a scheme like this doesn't seem to follow directly from LWE, it's believed to be secure, I think it's fair to say, for natural looking FHE schemes. And in particular, this kind of circular security underlies unleveled fully homomorphic encryption. So it's not a crazy kind of assumption to say that GSW, fully homomorphic encryption, remains secure in the presence of a key cycle like this. The other kind of leakage is a little bit more complicated. It's called, in Gay and Pass, they call this shielded randomness leakage. The basic idea is that in the middle of a CPA attack security game, the attacker gets to call some oracle, which I'm going to describe in a minute. What the attacker does is specify a circuit. The oracle evaluates this circuit with inputs given by the message that the attacker is trying to learn something about. And then the oracle tells the attacker some information about the randomness of encryption that results after that circuit is evaluated fully homomorphically. So just a tiny bit more detail, and then I'll wrap up in 30 seconds or so. Basically, what happens is the attacker chooses a circuit. The oracle does an FHE eval on that circuit and then releases the resulting randomness of encryption. If we're released in the clear, this would be broken. So instead, the oracle releases it in a shielded fashion by adding some fresh randomness R star. The catch is that the attacker has also previously gotten to see something about R star. They've gotten to see a fresh encryption of 0 using randomness of encryption R star. So let me, this is also a reasonable thing to believe would be secure. In fact, it's secure under LWE. However, moving past this slide, it turns out that in the presence of both types of leakage, this is broken. The scheme is broken, and I'll tell you our attack from 10,000 feet. Remember that what the attacker gets to do to call this randomness leakage oracle is choose a circuit, and that circuit gets to depend on both the encrypted key cycle and the information that the attacker has about the shielding randomness that will eventually be used to release the randomness encryption from the circuit. And the key idea is that the attacker will decrypt CT star to get access to R star inside the circuit that's going to be evaluated homomorphically. They can do that because they have access to the encrypted key cycle. For more details on the attack, I encourage you to watch our longer talk or have a look at our paper. I'll wrap up here. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, nice. So let's move on to the next talk. Alex Mai will present how to meet ternary LWE keys.
Alex, you're muted.
Shows full screen, right? Everything fine so far?
It is full screen, yes. And you're
okay.
I can hear you now.
Okay, fine. So what do I mean by ternary LWE keys? So here's a definition of the problem. You are given A and B as usual in LWE, and you have the equation AS is B plus E, but now your secret S and your error E are ternary reactors, so they are from 0 plus minus 1 to the n. So many crypto systems use these keys of bounded range, and our results also apply if you have a larger fixed range, like you add in plus minus 2s, and I will show you an example on the last slide. And for the applications in this talk, I will focus on N-true, but there are more applications in the paper like the signature schemes, Bliss and GLP. Okay, so in N-true, you do not only have ternary keys, but you also fix a number of plus minus ones that you have, and this is called the weight, and this is defined here. So a secret has weight W if S has W plus minus 1 coefficient, so non-zero coefficients. So as an example, here's an N-true instance with weight 254, and you usually evenly split in ones and plus minus ones. So now we are ready to define a search space. So the search space is now the number of ternary keys, which is certain weight W. And as an example here, we have this multinomial coefficient as a search space for the keys. And in this talk, I will ask a very elementary question. So what is the combinatorial complexity of finding S? There's no lattices so far, but I will come to lattices later. So the easiest thing is you search for all ternary S in your search space, and you check whether AS minus B is ternary, and this gives you complexity equal to the search space with constant memory. But you could also do a meet in the middle. So you split your secret S in 2 parts of the same dimension and half. And then, as you would expect in a meet in the middle, you obtain the square root of the time, but also memory square root of the search space. Yeah, and this is due to Odlyshko from 97, and it's kind of the state of the art for the combinatorial complexity of finding S. So what do we do in this talk? So I will use a different splitting of S. Well, let's see. Something seems to be broken. Oop. I hope you can find, no, it's fine. So I split S as a sum, S1 and S2, both of full dimension, but with smaller weight. And this is called the representation technique. It was introduced by Hockerhoff, Kramer and Joule at Eurocrypt 2010 in the context of subset sum. And here you see some improvements for subset sum within the last decade. And it was also used for the best syndrome decoding algorithms called MMT and BGMM, also like 10 years ago. Now you might wonder why nobody applied this cool technique to LWE, and the reason might be that the error in LWE makes your problem an approximate subset sum problem, and it seems that the representation techniques exact subset sum problems. So our solution, our workaround to make the representation technique work also for LWEs, we guess a very small portion of our error E, namely we guess R, which is O of n over log n coordinates, and that suffices already to achieve our main result. So our main result is our algorithm solves ternary LWE in time and memory, which is 3 to the R, which is for guessing, times roughly the fourth root of the search space. And since 3 to the R is slightly sub-exponential by our choice of R, and the search space is exponential in n, we can put this guessing into a small O of 1 term here. So you see asymptotically, it doesn't matter, but in practice, of course, it does. And here you see some practical results on the next slide. So I have some entry results. So there's the IEEE standard from 2008, and there's a current NIST proposal from this year. And they differ by actually the relative weight that is chosen. So you see IEEE is a kind of smallish weight, whereas the current proposal is kind of a large weight. And then here you see the search space in this column, and here's our result. So you see in practice, we do not really get the fourth root, but more the third root maybe, and this is due to guessing. But you should also see that in the small weight setting, we are actually improving on the current lattice estimates. Whereas in the large weight setting, we are a tad bit away from the current lattice estimates. So it seems that the Entru team, and among them, the chair of the session, made a smart decision in choosing large weights and therefore also large search spaces, yeah, to guard against this attack. Also, it was not there when the proposal was made. Okay, so in order to wrap up, as a conclusion, we improved the best combinatorial attack from the square root of the search space to almost the fourth root. And this improves upon lattice estimates in the small weight regime. And there are more generalizations in the paper. So for instance, there are time memory trade-offs, and there's a Bliss example with also non-ternary keys, which achieves like the fifth root. So this is kind of promising if we generalize. But in general, it's not so clear how to generalize the analysis. It gets very complicated for arbitrary maximums. So this is an open problem. And then as another problem, can we close this gap between asymptotics and practical parameters? So that is, can we get rid of the small O of 1 for guessing? And now that we have two algorithms, is there a good hybrid between our new combinatorial algorithm and lattice reduction? And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, cool stuff. Thank you, Alex. Next up, we have Joe Roll telling us about lattice reduction with an approximate enumeration oracle.
Hang on, give me just 1 second.
Yeah.
Can you see this?
Not yet.
Can you see it? Okay. Oh.
Not yet. Your Zoom window.
That's not good. Bear me a second. Okay, how about now?
Looks good. Yeah, just full screen that.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Thank you. So hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Lattice Reduction with Approximate Enumeration Oracles, and this is joint work with Martin Albrecht, Shubai, and Jan Wiley. So I'd just like to begin with sort of a high level why you should care. And so we're at a crypto conference, and so we care about the difficulty of breaking crypto systems. And when you're thinking about Entru or LWE-based crypto systems, what you really care about is the difficulty of solving the shortest vector problem, and how this varies depending on the computational model that you're considering. If we consider the polynomial regime, then the algorithm that you will care about is enumeration. And enumeration is an algorithm that walks through a super exponentially large tree and produces the shortest vector for you. Now, because this tree is super exponentially large, typically you will either embed it inside BKZ so that you can reduce the size of the lattice you're operating on any given time, or you will cut the tree so that paths that are unlikely to lead to short vectors are sort of discarded. And this is referred to as pruning. So I'm sure you've all seen this diagram a million times before, but just as a recap, on the left-hand side here, you have a 2D lattice, and on the right-hand side, you have exactly the same lattice, but the shortest vector is sort of marked. Now, in 2 dimensions, this problem is known to be quite easy, but if you could imagine turning this into, say, a dimension 1000 problem, it becomes significantly harder. And so it's quite natural to think about how you might try and make this problem easier to solve. Quite naturally, you can ask, what would happen if we would accept a vector that is longer than optimal by, say, a factor at most alpha, where alpha is some constant factor greater than 1. So intuitively, you might think that this is easier, but it's not necessarily clear for this by how much easier it is in practice. And so thankfully, this has already been studied before. So Lean and Win in this paper from last year showed that if you choose some pruning parameter rho and use extreme pruning, which is an aggressive form of pruning, then this relaxation technique accelerates BKZ by a speed up of around 4 alpha squared times 1 minus rho, all to the power of k over 4, where k is your block size. But the problem with this is that it makes the quality of your output basis worse, because at each step you're accepting a vector that is longer than what you would get in an ideal situation. And so what we do in this work is we say, well, as opposed to doing this relaxation over a block size of width k, what happens if we increase it to, say, k alpha, which is the smallest block size such that our quality metric, called the root Hermite factor, does not increase. And we show that even when increasing this block size, the speed up from relaxation is exponentially faster than doing enumeration over the original block size. So even though we have to increase the size of the block, we still get a speed up from this relaxation while still achieving the same root Hermite factor. And so just before I wrap up, I want to show you this graph that compares sort of the different approaches for doing this. So this black line here is the running time given by FPLLL, which is the sort of state of the art at the moment for an implementation. Beneath this in the blue dotted line is the work from crypto last year. And then the green line there shows the result for this work. So you can see that although we only improve, well, I say only, improve the lower order term in this, we are able to move the crossover for 2 to the 256 operations to around about rank 500, which is, you can see, higher than for the blue line, which is around about 450, and higher than the black line, which is around about 400. So in other words, this work presents the fastest way to do enumeration inside BKZ. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Next up, we have Thomas Espoto presenting towards faster polynomial time lattice reduction.
Can you see this?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks for the introduction. This is joint work with Paul Kirchner and Caroline Fu from Rennes University. Okay, so in general, finding a short vector in the lattice is a hard problem. However, in 82, Lenstra and Lovash show that there exists some polynomial time algorithm which allows you to find some mildly short vector, that is to say, which is 2 to the n times longer than the shortest vector of a lattice. You might say, okay, it's pretty big, but actually it's still useful because with this algorithm, you can solve a plethorous number of problems, such as differential approximation, finding minimal polynomials of logic numbers, doing factorization of a rational, and of course, doing cryptanalysis. And this is maybe why we are here today. Quantitatively speaking, the naive analysis of the LL algorithm reveals that the dependency is 6 in the dimension of the lattice and is cubic in the bit size you're using. However, in 2009, Nguyen and Stelle showed that by using carefully floating point arithmetic, you can get some dependency in the bit size, which is quadratic and remains 6 in the dimension. And more recently, in 2016, Neumayer and Stelle showed that with a recursive strategy on the rank, you can achieve quasi-linear time complexity in the bit size and dependency in 4 to some small epsilon in the dimension. However, the constants which are hidden in this big O are pretty big, and this algorithm have never been properly implemented. So a question is now how we can improve the dependency in the dimension, and if we can also get some practical results from this. So just to recall, the LL algorithm epitomizes a very neat idea, which is that reducing an arbitrary rank lattice can be done by using subcalls to rank 2 reduction, for instance, using the Gauss algorithm, and do some progress all along the lattice until no improvement can be done. To replace this iterative sequence of rank reduction. So just to draw things up, if I have my basis here, what I'm going to do is to do reduction in rank 2 on non-overlapping blocks, for instance, up here, here, and I can do them all in parallel because they're non-overlapping. But then if I want to mix what happened in my vectors, I need to shift slightly a bit the blocks and do reduction over all the shifted blocks by 1/2. Okay. And then you do that over and over and over until nothing happened, and your basis will be reduced at the end. So you can remark that all of these operations are actually quite local. So it's possible to do some recursion on blocks. And by that, I mean that now you're not doing small blocks of size 2, but you're using big blocks, like non-overlapping over here. And then you do recursion inside this block to reduce them. And once you're fully done, what you will do is do this shifting again by 1/2 a block to mix everything up, and you do that by recursion again. So once again, you iterate until nothing can happen. And this design, which exploits locality, can be pushed to its limits by designing the full reduction algorithm using only block matrix operations. And in particular, we will replace the so-called Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization by the block version, which is block-Cholesky algorithm, and the so-called size reduction algorithm by the block-Saysen reduction. To be a bit more precise, our reduction procedure works as follows. So our base case would be dimension 2 as previously, and we use Gauss algorithm or Schoeneger algorithm if you want to be fast. And then for a certain number of iterations, you will start by computing the Q-rad decomposition. So it means that you're working modular rotation of the lattice. So once one rotation is fixed, you Saysen reduce it, which means that you will control the condition number of the matrix and avoid an explosion of the size of the coefficient. And then you do this iteration on the blocks. So for every blocks, you will recursively reduce it if it's not already pre-reduced. And by that, you can check by some volumic argument that the first half of the block is not too large compared to the second one. And then you iterate that until the basis is reduced. So by doing so, you can achieve to reduce your basis into a LLL manner. So you can do even the slightly more reduced and LLL reduced basis in times which is essentially in the time of matrix multiplication. So the omega times the condition number, where omega is the constant of matrix multiplication. So I point out here that these results are fully heuristic because you need some very strong heuristic on the precision needed to handle the computation, and we did not manage to make that disappear. So practically speaking, if we compare with the state-of-the-art implementation FPLLL, for lattices in dimension, for instance, 344 for knapsack types, we achieve results which are around 35 times faster than the state-of-the-art. And for n-true type lattices in dimension up to 512, we achieve some reduction which is up to 45 times faster than the state-of-the-art. We were able to.
You're cutting out a bit.
Dimension up to 5. What?
You're
Sorry?
cutting out a bit. You may want to turn off your camera.
I can do that, sure. Is it better? I don't know if it's better. We're able to reduce lattice in dimension up to 5,000 in a bit more than 1 day. So to conclude with, we presented some fast LLL variant, which is designed using recursion and block matrix operation. Release in a process manner our implementation, which is currently the fastest available. And last but not least, proving this conjectural results on the complexity will be a very interesting challenge, but it seems very hard, and we were not able to manage to do so currently. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Next up, we have Thijs Larhoven presenting lower bounds on lattice sieving and information set decoding. I can see your screen.
Yeah. Okay.
Looks good.
Yeah. So this is joint work with Elena. Yeah. So I don't really need to motivate why we need to switch to post-quantum crypto, but like lattice-based and code-based cryptography, I mean, they are kind of the main candidates for replacing classical cryptography. Like most of the finalists in the NIST competition, they are based on lattices and codes. So we really need to study the hardness of these underlying problems, like lattice problems and decoding problems, and to study algorithms, of course. And ideally, we also want to choose schemes which have like long-term security, like even in 50 years, they are still secure. So we want to have conservative bounds on what attackers can do and what are the best algorithms. And so we need to prepare for better hardware, but also for improvements in cryptanalysis. Like people might come up with faster algorithms which really threaten the security. So ideally, we would like to have like conservative bounds on what an attacker can do. So maybe like some kind of lower bound on what the cost of any algorithm to break a scheme would have to cost. So okay, so we would like to study the concrete hardness of these problems. So we study the algorithms for this. So like in lattices, we have lattice sieving, which is kind of the state of the art right now in combination with base reduction. I mean, there's also enumeration in one of the previous talks here, but like lattice sieving is asymptotically the best, and also in practice is one of the best right now. The information set decoding algorithms are on the code-based side are one of the most important ones. And both of these approaches, I mean, they're kind of different, solving different problems, but they kind of follow the same approach of first sampling a large database of kind of long vectors under some metric. Then you combine these vectors to find shorter vectors in some way of combining them. And then you hope that if you repeat this a number of times, then hopefully you find some short vectors which then solve your lattice problem or your decoding problem. And so one of the key problems in both of these applications is that you need to solve some closest pairs problem, in a sense, like you want to find nearby pairs of vectors which you can combine to form shorter vectors. So in lattice sieving, you just want to add them, and then you want to find pairs of vectors which are like close to one another and that you can combine them to make shorter vectors. So naively, if you have a large database and you want to find all pairs which combine, or if there's one of them, just find this one, then that takes like quadratic time in the size of the database. But there are these smarter approaches that even work in high dimensions that you encounter in cryptography, like for instance hash-based approaches, like lookout sensitive hashing, you may have heard of it. But there's like a subquadratic time complexity, like subquadratic in the side of the database. And they're actually also practical, people are using them. And also there are currently no matching lower bounds. So like there are these approaches that we are using, but we don't know if they are optimal. There might be better ways to do this closest pairs problem and to actually speed up like lattice sieving and information decoding just by improving like the algorithm that we're using for this closest pairs problem. And that is kind of like, yeah, unsatisfactory. Like we want to know that at least this part you cannot improve, so that we have some kind of guarantee that, you know, algorithms are not going to be improved in the future and the security will be lower. So that's where this work comes in. So in this work, we studied like this closest pairs problem that we encounter in this setting for both lattices and for codes, because these lower bounds did not really exist. And we tried to find these lower bounds, and we actually got some. And they are conditional, like they are only for this hash-based model. But okay, that's quite a broad model because it captures most of the algorithms that have been used to date in cryptanalysis. And for the lattice sieving setting, this lower bound is actually tight. So it shows that actually the the best technique that we have right now, like the best upper bound for this closed pairs problem for lattice sieving is actually matches the lower bound. So for instance, this shows that this work from 2016 with like the 0.292 exponent for the shortest vector problem is optimal within this model, of course. And some quantum results are also conditionally optimal, assuming that you're not improving the quantum result, which was actually done also recently. And for the information decoding setting, we get a lower bound which is not tight, but there's like the gap, at least between the lower bound and the upper bound, is not that big. So it does give you some indication that, okay, you're not going to improve the overall cryptanalysis just by improving the closest pair algorithm. Like you might decrease the security a bit, specifically, but not so much. So yeah, also some kind of useful result there. But there is still a gap. So it might be that like the current best algorithm from Alex, also from 2015, like the closest pairs algorithm that we are using there might not actually be optimal. You might be able to do better, but we don't know. And so cryptographic implication is like what are you going to take away from this? So okay, you get a slightly better understanding of the hardness of these underlying hard problems. So for cryptanalysis, if you work on cryptanalysis, so yeah, the main takeaway, I guess, is that you should search for improvements elsewhere, because on this closest pairs problem, you're not really going to do much better than what we have now, like this, especially for lattice sieving. Like we already have the optimal approach for this. And for the code-based setting, you might be able to do slightly better, but yeah, you're not going to improve too much. There have been some works recently improving other parts of like lattice sieving combined with basis induction, or studying like lower order terms, improving those. Yeah, this also motivates the focus on the best lattice sieve that has already been done recently, like working on like this algorithm that uses this fastest algorithm for the closest pairs problem for the lattice sieving setting, and just implementing it well, and yeah, improving the lower order terms. That makes sense now that we know that actually this algorithm is actually the best. Like you're not going to improve it unless you find some really new ideas that we currently don't have. And also for parameter selection, this gives you some kind of, I mean, it does not prove security that no one is ever going to break it, but it gives you at least some conditional security guarantees that if your attacker is going to attack your scheme with lattice sieving, and it's going to use lattice sieving with some, say, some algorithm for the closest pairs problem, then it's not going to do better. Assuming it's also in this hash-based model, but okay, it's at least some conditional security guarantee, which is useful, especially for long-term applications. Right, so that's it. So thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you, Thijs. Okay, so questions are now coming in the Zulip. Please post them there and preface your question with the speaker that you want to address. I am going to take the opportunity to ask my own question first before we dive into those. So for Sam, I am really curious about the process of discovery here for you. So you didn't quite get to it in this 5-minute talk. I understand. I encourage everyone to go and watch the longer talk. But it's quite an elegant attack. And I'm wondering, did it just kind of pop out to you? Did you spend a lot of time manually looking for things? Or, I mean, based on the form of the attack, it almost feels like we could be doing some kind of computer search to find things like this. So I'm really curious how you found it, and maybe if you have any recommendations for system designers, how they might find these kind of in the review process.
Wow, that's an excellent question. I'm not sure I have such a great answer for it. So I guess I think the part of the attack that you maybe think, like one thing I didn't get to talk about was gadgets that we use to that we stick inside circuits that get evaluated fully homomorphically to move information which is sitting in the message part of the ciphertext over into the randomness part. And so we use details of like the way the FHE scheme is implemented, you know, clever use of multiplication gates to move information around. And that kind of thing you maybe could imagine searching for gadgets. This idea to use the encrypted key cycle to do a decryption inside the circuit, it's hard for me to say what the process of discovery was, because frankly, my co-author Ayush, you know, the idea seemed to come fully formed. So you have to ask Ayush a little bit, I guess. He was super brilliant in inventing this. Yeah, I think Ayush played a lot, though. He played around a lot before coming to us with this. So I can't speak to exactly how he came up with it. Yeah,
cool.
What I will say, the last thing I'll say is that I think there is, I don't have an answer to the last part of your question for what's a systematic thing. I agree. We absolutely need one. That's one thing we're thinking about, is how to
Mhm.
systematize this kind of attack so that we can present you with some calculation you can do or something you can check to say, okay, you're secure against this kind of attack.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to whatever you come up with there. That's great. Let's see, moving on. We're getting a lot of questions for Thomas, but I'm still going to use my privilege here and ask a question for Alex. Actually, Dan Bernstein has just asked a question for Alex. So let me read that. Dan asks, for the 3 to the R search on ternary vectors of length R, or the 5 to the R search on ones with plus and minus 2s, did you try searching the most common vectors, obviously re-randomizing the positions if that doesn't work? For example, Kyber uses the range -2 to 2, but mostly -1 to 1. Thoughts on that, Alex?
No, this is not used currently. And actually, I was oversimplifying in this 5-minute talk. So you can actually meet in the middle of the search. So what you do is it's more as 3 to the R over 2 or 5 to the R over 2. But you're right. So if you have more information on the error, then you can use that. But it's not done in this work so far.
Okay, and then while we have you unmuted, I'm really curious about extending this to the hybrid attack and what the barriers are there. If you have any, just thoughts on what makes it difficult, because it doesn't seem easy.
Yeah, that was my initial motivation to actually do it, and I have to admit that I failed. In a certain sense, the key equation is used twice. Yeah, it's used for the hybrid, and it's also used for this. So in a certain sense, in this new attack, you really need the full equations, and you cannot split them because you don't know the target vector in between. Yeah, so you kind of split them to 2 sides, but then you have to have a target for one side of them. So at the moment I'm kind of skeptical whether you can do it for hybrids. That would maybe really threaten N-true security, but honestly, I think N-true stays safe because you cannot. But that's one of the open questions of this paper. So I mentioned the hybrid between lattice reduction and this one. There's maybe a hybrid, but you are talking about the real hybrid, this Haugrave-Graham hybrid. And for this, there are also current results that tell you that maybe the success probability is heavily underestimated so far, right? And that also comes into play because you need these homomorphic properties of this hybrid. So I'm not super positive that you can get a lattice hybrid here where you enumerate. So in a certain sense, the old lattice hybrid works because you are kind of enumerating all the keys. But this is not what I do. I only enumerate those keys which satisfy a certain equation. And this is actually only a very small portion. And that's where the speed up comes from.
Okay. Yeah, so let's see. Question for Joe in chat. There was already some discussion about the crossover point between sieving and enumeration, but and people can go read that. Joe's already answered there. I'm curious about when you throw quantum enumeration into the mix. It seems like you should get pretty close to something that works, and I'd just like to hear from Joe what you guys have tried and what the barriers are.
So naively, we looked at computing the crossover between sort of the quadratic speedup for enumeration and for quantum sieving, but there are some problems. So quantum sieving is much better understood from a circuit complexity perspective than enumeration is. That's one big thing. The second thing is that the quantum enumeration algorithms are sort of dependent on the number of bases you need to store and pre-process. It appears that we only need to do one enumeration as opposed to a constant re-randomization, but we don't know why that's the case. We sort of assume it's due to the expensive pre-processing, but we haven't investigated this further. And even with all of that, even assuming that everything is good, sieving is still better. So there is some further work there to be done, but sieving is still the primary thing to be concerned about when setting parameters.
Okay, interesting. Because in some of the previous work on quantum enumeration, something that stood out to me is that you do have all of these, many bases around, and you need to have them probably in quantum RAM, which would make them quite expensive. So it seemed like maybe the fact that you're getting such a nice speed up classically and not needing all those bases around, that actually might tip the scales. But yeah, you're saying
possibly.
it doesn't. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's see. We have lots of questions for Thomas, and I guess some of them on the implementation. So, can we expect to be able to use this new LLL algorithm in some of the easy to use packages like PyLLL or PyFBLLL, or would we want to like, is this something that you really need specialized hardware and like lots of parallel machines, or maybe is it useful for me just I run into a lattice and I want to reduce it? Should I use your algorithm?
Yeah. So actually, it was we designed it to be fully parallelizable, and it is. But our, let's say, main target is very accessible machines like regular servers, or even like desktop computers, which are just multi-core architecture with 8 cores or something like that. It's not we didn't develop it as being we didn't want it to run it on like grid architectures or whatever. It's just for very simple machines. So yeah, definitely it's supposed to improve practical lattice reductions that you can run on your own computer.
Cool. And how about integration into some packages? Is that can I expect to use it anytime soon?
As I was answering, so basically right now we were writing some of the code to have a cleaner code base because like let's be honest, it's very proof of concept right now, and definitely we would be very interested in merging that with some of the Big Easy because we didn't have any improvement on the enumeration or sieving part. It's purely on the LLL base and nothing else.
Right. Okay. Thomas, did any of the other questions jump out at you as something you might want to answer audio right now? I'm having trouble keeping up with the chat. Let's see.
I have a question for Alex, if there's a...
Yeah, sure.
Alex, it occurred to me, your attack is primarily framed in terms of LWE with ternary errors or small errors. Is there anything you can do in the context of learning with rounding? So where some of these ternary values are, deterministic round off, let's say ternary, for example. Does that help the attack in any way that you can imagine?
So honestly, I don't know. So it's not, I think it's not really limited to only ternary errors. You could maybe work with other errors as well. So far, the way I present it, you have to search for them, and that's why they are limited, right? But you might use locality sensitive hashing or things like this to do it. For learning with rounding, actually, I have to look up whether this makes sense or not, or whether it helps or not. I cannot answer it. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Okay, maybe a kind of a soft question for Thijs. So it's a really nice result. One thing that concerns me a little bit, and I mean, you addressed this in your talk, there's this gap between the, when you're actually breaking a crypto system, you have, the dimension that you're going to perform sieving in, and that's kind of a big open question. So we've seen some improvements on that with the dimensions per free trick or some of your own work. What's your feeling on how those will progress? Do we really get, this conditional assurance that we're getting from your lower bound on the sieving techniques or the nearest neighbor search techniques? How confident should we be, or is there?
I mean, so in the end, the result only says that if you are trying to improve like this part of your approach, then you're not going to do much better. I mean, even there, it's like part of it is asymptotic and part of it is quite concrete. But like if you want to improve the nearest neighbor part, you're not going to do better. So that's some assurance that you get. But indeed, there's like the closed pairs problem inside the lattice sieving, for instance, which like maybe you can do something else there, and then also lattice sieving, like in a concrete attack, you probably do some basis reduction. You can do maybe something else there, like with Jessica, you can do better than just doing it as a black box. And there are several other things also, like the dimensions for free, and yeah, and maybe even you can do something smarter than lattice sieving. I mean, there's of course, but this is like just for this part, and of course, like right now, the state of the art for attacking a scheme would be usually like some form of basis reduction with sieving inside of it, and the sieving would be with hash-based nearest neighbor searching. So yeah, I mean, it's a conditional part for part of your algorithm, of course. I mean, we're not there yet, but it's the first step, I guess, towards some lower bounds at least. So, yeah. I don't know.
Okay, thanks. Alex has a question for you, Thijs. Is the suboptimality of my Ozerov 15 an artifact of the full exponential scenario? Is it optimal in the sub-exponential scenario or in any?
Yeah, so there were already past works also like on nearest neighbor techniques, but also on lower bounds for the sub-exponential size of the database in terms of the dimension. And for those, like several techniques were optimal, also techniques which turn out to be suboptimal, for instance, in the lattice sieving setting, they turned out to be optimal in the exponential list size. So it's really a different problem. You have to look at it separately. So yeah, I think the technique that you're using in this 2015 result is actually also optimal if you look at the sub-exponential list sizes. But yeah, I mean, it could also be optimal in the exponential list sizes. We just have a lower bound which does not match the upper bound. So yeah, I mean, there's still some work to do there to see if the lower bounds should go up a bit to match the upper bound, or if the upper bound is actually not, yeah, if it should go down towards lower bounds using different code than what you like. Spherical caps don't match some bound in the proof somehow, like in the lower bound. So, yeah.
Okay, Elena is saying MO meets our lower bound in the sub-exponential non-dense regime. Just a little clarification there. Okay, are there any more questions? Now would be a good time to drop them into the chat. If there's anything I've missed and somebody wants to just flag me on it. Okay, if not, it looks like we're a little ahead of schedule.